Muhammad Ali Jinnah, posited that the Muslims and Hindus of India were two separate nations. Islam and Hinduism are not religions in the strict sense of the word, but are, in fact, different and distinct social orders. During a Muslim League session in Delhi in 1943, Jinnah asked, "Who gave us this word, Pakistan?" His question was answered with cries of Hindus. Smiling at the response, Jinnah went on to say, "Let me tell you, it is their fault." In a 1924 article for the now defunct Indian Daily Tribune, a prominent Hindu nationalist, Lala Lajpat Rai, suggested that Hindus and Muslims should throw out the British and then create separate states for themselves. After Pakistan's creation, Jinnah consciously downplayed the two nations theory in the hope that the new country would evolve into becoming a modern nation state, albeit with a Muslim majority. Even years after Jinnah's demise in 1948, there was still nothing called the ideology of Pakistan. However, the two nations theory was firmly woven into textbooks. It was slightly expanded to mean that the Muslims of India were a nation that had overcome their ethnic, sectarian and sub-sectarian differences to defeat Hindu hegemony and live peacefully in a separate country of their own. In 1959, when Ayub Khan got himself elected as president, he changed the country's name to the Republic of Pakistan from the 1956's version, Islamic Republic of Pakistan. The ideology of Pakistan was an afterthought. As a term, it is nowhere to be found in the speeches of the country's founders. What one does find in textbooks between 1947, the year Pakistan came into being, and 1978, though, is the term two-nation theory. This theory was said to have been formulated by the country's primary founder, Muhammad Ali Jinnah. And Muhammad Ali Jinnah posited that the Muslims and Hindus of India were two separate nations. During the first 30 years of the country, textbooks and nationalist historians posited that it was this theory that had propelled the Pakistan movement. Indeed, from 1940 onwards, Jinnah did begin to speak openly about the separateness of India's two major religious communities, that is, Hindus and Muslims, adding that Islam and Hinduism are not religions in the strict sense of the word, but are, in fact, different and distinct social orders. This is from Jinnah's speech on March the 20th, 1940. Then in 1944, he said, "We maintain and hold that Muslims and Hindus are two major nations by any definition or test of a nation." Yet, he was conscious of a forgotten fact, a fact that most Pakistani and Indian nationalist historians and ideologues have continued to suppress. This fact has to do with early Hindu nationalists. During a Muslim League session in Delhi in 1943, Jinnah asked, "Who gave us this word, Pakistan?" His question was answered with cries of Hindus. Smiling at the response, Jinnah went on to say, "Let me tell you, it is their fault. They fathered this word upon us." Now, what was Jinnah implying here? On the surface, this may seem to be about Jinnah criticizing the Indian National Congress for being inflexible towards the demands of Jinnah and of the Muslim League. But then, why did so many early Pakistani and Indian nationalist historians shy away from these words? This is because Jinnah was alluding to the Hindu nationalists who first came up with the idea of Muslims and Hindus being separate nations. In a 1924 article for the now defunct Indian Daily Tribune, a prominent Hindu nationalist, Lala Lajpat Rai, suggested that Hindus and Muslims should throw out the British and then create separate states for themselves. Rai wrote, "There should be a clear partition of India, and that the Muslims should create their own states in the northwest frontier province, present-day Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, Western Punjab, Sindh and the East Bengal, and all regions where they were in a majority." Other prominent Hindu nationalists of the period too saw no place for non-Hindus, especially Muslims, in India. Lala Lajpat Rai also said, so basically, the two nations theory was built on an idea first aired by a Hindu nationalist. And Jinnah was quite aware of this. This may also be the reason why he waited until 1940 to even mention the word Pakistan, despite the word being present since 1933. When Jinnah and his comrades came close to creating a separate Muslim majority state, none of them spoke of an ideology that would navigate the polity of the new country. What's more, there is enough evidence to even suggest that after Pakistan's creation, Jinnah consciously downplayed the two nations theory in the hope that the new country would evolve into becoming a modern nation state, albeit with a Muslim majority. Jinnah's speech during the inaugural session of Pakistan's first Constituent Assembly quite clearly demonstrates his desire to move forward as a leader of a modern, inclusive nation state and leave behind the implosive communal politics that he had been pushed into before the creation of Pakistan. It had also taken a toll on his health. Even years after Jinnah's demise in 1948, there was still nothing called the ideology of Pakistan. However, the two nations theory was firmly woven into textbooks. It was slightly expanded to mean that the Muslims of India were a nation that had overcome their ethnic, sectarian and sub-sectarian differences to defeat Hindu hegemony and live peacefully in a separate country of their own. However, it's also true that at the time of Pakistan's creation, there was as many or even more Muslims in India than there were in Pakistan. A 1957 book, Pakistani Way of Life, by the eminent Pakistani historian, the late Ishtiyaq Hussain Qureshi, does not mention the word ideology, but it states that the country's polity is regulated by a nationalism driven by the two nations theory and an enlightened Islam. This was how the authors of the country's first constitution in 1956 had described Islam as well after declaring Pakistan an Islamic republic. The constitution, however, was largely secular. Yet when in 1958 President Iskandar Mirza and military chief Ayub Khan imposed the country's first martial law, they described the constitution as a ploy to peddle Islam for political purposes. Ayub Khan also went to the extent of suggesting that the constitution could have provided the clerics enough space to take over the state. In 1959, when Ayub Khan got himself elected as president, he changed the country's name to the Republic of Pakistan from the 1956's version, Islamic Republic of Pakistan. An electoral system called basic democracies was also introduced. The assembly was packed with members of the party that Ayub had formed, which was known as the Convention Muslim League. But some members of other political parties too managed to enter. It was in this assembly that the term Pakistan ideology or Nazariya-e-Pakistan was first heard. The assembly had just one member from the Islamist outfit, the Jamaat-e-Islami. During a debate, the JI member mentioned the words Pakistan's ideology. Originally, the Jamaat-e-Islami had opposed the creation of Pakistan and had denounced Jinnah. When asked to define this ideology, the Jamaat-e-Islami member responded by saying, Islam is Pakistan's ideology. But the term vanished after this short exchange. It returned 6 years later in 1968 during the height of an anti-Ayub Khan movement in Pakistan. The Islamist ideologue Abul Ala Maududi, who was also the chief of the Jamaat-e-Islami, began to speak of a Pakistan ideology, knowing that the Ayub regime was on its last legs. The regime had banned the Jamaat-e-Islami in 1964, but the Supreme Court overturned the ban. There is every likelihood that Maududi was aware of Ayub's paper on Islamic ideology and believed that he, that is Maududi, should be the one shaping this ideology instead of Ayub. Another reason why Maududi exhibited urgency in this context was the rapid rise of Zulfiqar Ali Bhutto's left-leaning Pakistan People's Party, the growing influence of the Bengali nationalist outfit, the Awami League, and the leftist nature of the anti-Ayub Khan movement. Ayub wrote a paper which he titled Islamic Ideology in Pakistan. The paper was circulated among army officers. After getting input from the intellectuals, Ayub had begun to shape an ideology himself. Ignorance, we began to regard Islamic ideology as synonymous with bigotry and theocracy, and subconsciously began to feel shy of it. We must define this ideology in simple but modern terms. Maududi had been a severe critic of Ayub and of the regime's modernist understanding of Islam, but he became equally perturbed by the spread of leftist ideas on campuses. He wrote that the so-called modernist dictators in the Muslim world were the Trojan horses of the West that had sneaked in to spread secularism among Muslims. He also saw the communists and socialists as Trojan horses, but of communist powers. According to Maududi, Pakistan's Islamic polity was being invaded by secularists on the one hand and communists on the other. He underlined the need for having a national ideology that could navigate the rulers to Islamize the society and then enact a Sharia state, which Maududi called Hukumat-e-Ilahi. The latter was an outcome of Maududi's political theory that he had shaped in the 1940s. Ayub resigned in March 1969 and handed over power to General Yahya Khan. A Jamaat-e-Islami delegation led by Maududi met the new military dictator and came out of the meeting looking satisfied. The delegation told the press that unlike Ayub, the new ruler had agreed to serve Islam and form a Pakistan ideology based on Sharia. Ironically though, the general who had agreed to do this was notorious for being an alcoholic and a womanizer. Maududi's idea of Islamic ideology was countered by intellectuals in the Pakistan People's Party who equated Islam with socialism and began to formulate an ideology which they called Islamic socialism. In a series of essays for the progressive Urdu weekly Nusrat, Pakistan People's Party men such as Hanif Rame and Safdar Mir explained Islamic socialism as an idea whose immediate roots could be found in concepts such as Arab nationalism, and also in the writings of the philosopher-poet Muhammad Iqbal. Rame then went on to explore Islamic socialism's deeper roots. He claimed that the earliest seeds of socialism were sown in the days when Islam first established itself as a faith, and according to Bhutto, it was Islam that gave birth to the principles and concepts of socialism, and this was the Islam of the people of Pakistan. Just before the 1970 elections, 113 ulama authored and signed a fatwa declaring socialism as a great threat to the ideology of Pakistan. The odd thing in this is there was absolutely no articulation of an ideology of Pakistan other than by individuals and some political parties. The fatwa does not explain what the ideology of Pakistan was. Of course, the authors of the fatwa would have replied by saying Islam. But then, Islam to the founders of Pakistan and Ayub had meant something very different to the way it was being explained by Maududi, especially in the context of the faith's ideological and political roles. In the 1970 elections, the Islamist parties were routed. Awami League swept the elections in East Pakistan and the Pakistan People's Party won an outright majority in West Pakistan. But due to the inability of the military regime, the People's Party and the Awami League could not agree on a power-sharing formula. Violence erupted in East Pakistan. The violence soon mutated into becoming an all-out civil war in the eastern wing of the country. It was during this commotion that two books appeared. Both were titled Ideology of Pakistan. One was authored by the journalist and author Sharif Mujahid, and the other by Justice Javed Iqbal, son of Muhammad Iqbal. In content, both are similar to Ayub's 1959 paper, even though Justice Iqbal explained that the unity which binds the country's diverse ethnic communities together was spiritual in nature. By this he meant Islam, or an Islam that was not theological or theocratic, but ruhani, spiritual. The latter is also how the Zulfiqar Ali Bhutto regime would begin to explain Islam, mainly by romanticizing folk cultures and Sufism. Due to the 1971 civil war, East Pakistan broke away to become Bangladesh, leaving behind a disoriented, disillusioned, and angry public in West Pakistan. Bhutto replaced Yahya as president. A new National Assembly came into being based on the results of the 1970 elections in West Pakistan, of course. The historian Ishtiaq Hussain Qureshi saw the country sliding into an existential crisis. What was Pakistan now about? Did the acrimonious departure of East Pakistan signal the demise of the two nations theory? Would Pakistan even survive as a nation state? These were some of the questions that Qureshi asked. In 1972, he answered them by writing, "Countries come and go, but religions stay." This was his way of recommending the dialing up of the role of Islam in the country's politics and the curriculum. In the 1973 constitution, the formation of a Council of Islamic Ideology was mandated, which was to aid the government in Islamizing the country's laws in all areas. The same year, a Department of Pakistan Studies was established at the Quaid-e-Azam University in Islamabad to formulate a Pakistan ideology. However, the government informed the parliament that it would take up to 7 years at least to Islamize the country's economy and its laws. In the textbooks, the notion that Pakistan was made in the name of Islam was dialed up, but the term Pakistan ideology was still missing. The Islamist parties wanted to expand the aforementioned notion to mean that Pakistan was made in the name of Islam so that an Islamic state could be built. But the government avoided using the term Islamic State. In 1976, Pakistan Studies departments began authorizing textbooks that would embody the notion of ideology, developing a cohesive understanding regarding it at the national level, and then project this ideology as the national ideology of Pakistan. The common themes of these textbooks were to be the struggle for freedom, based on the two nations theory with references to the Qaid-e-Azam and Allama Muhammad Iqbal, initial problems of the new state, constitutional developments focusing on Islamic provisions in the constitution, economic and industrial development, steps for Islamization, Pakistan and the Islamic world, and Pakistan as a welfare state. Bhutto's Pakistan People's Party swept the 1977 elections. A 9-party alliance, the Pakistan National Alliance, alleged that the elections were rigged. The alliance then began a protest movement which turned violent, especially in Karachi and Lahore. The country's main Islamist parties were at the core of the PNA, even though the alliance also consisted of centre-right but secular parties, left-wing Pashtun nationalists, and even some Marxist outfits. Yet the alliance promised enacting a Sharia state. Much of the Pakistan National Alliance's support came from urban middle and lower middle class segments. Industrialists too helped bankroll the protests. In July 1977, the Bhutto regime was toppled in a military coup by General Muhammad Zia-ul-Haq. Haq immediately adopted the PNA's Islamist narrative and promised to properly Islamize the country. Maududi's Jamaat-e-Islami agreed to join the new military regime's first cabinet. The second view derided the first view as the reason behind Pakistan's ideological weakness that led to the defeat of its armed forces in East Pakistan. The second view also bemoaned that Islam was not given any serious thought, nor was it used as a source to shape the country's state, governance, and polity, which remained rudderless, vulnerable, and disunited. It was this view that largely informed the contents of the 1973 Constitution, even though advocates of the first view also managed to influence the contents after pleading a middle path and not allowing democracy to be transformed into becoming a theo-democracy. Nevertheless, from 1974 onwards, this is exactly what it became. The Pakistan ideology, formulated in the 1980s, was a way to not only legitimize a dictatorship, but it also became a tool to rationalize the further Islamization of the constitution and the country's penal code. These have turned Pakistan into a theo-democracy with an ideology that fortifies it. Nation states shape ideologies that seek to instill in its citizens a sense of belonging and national purpose. The Pakistan ideology is now not about this. With its Islamist core, it alienates large segments of its diverse polity, which also include large groups of Muslims. It is seen as an ideology that was patronized by the armed forces and then adopted by militant Islamists, some of whom actually turned anti-state. The Pakistan ideology is thus a caricature of what a national ideology is supposed to be. It needs to be refurnished with ideas from the very first view, with an understanding that it wasn't these ideas that caused the 1971 rupture, but it was the callousness of a state which refused to recognize the democratic rights of its many ethnic groups. The Pakistan ideology needs to be embraced by most, if not all, Pakistanis, no matter what their ethnicity, sect, subsect, or religion, and not just by those who want to turn the country into an outright theocracy or a chauvinistic sectarian monolith.